You have 60 minutes before your entire empire disappears. The words echoed through the glass walls of Whitmore Neural Systems, and for the first time in years, Richard Whitmore had no answer. The billionaire CEO stood on the 42nd floor of his Austin, Texas headquarters, staring at rows of red warnings flashing across the massive security screens. Servers were failing. Customer data was locked. The artificial intelligence system that had made his company famous was collapsing faster than anyone could understand. Around the conference table, dozens of engineers avoided eye contact. They had spent hours searching for a solution, but every attempt ended the same way: failed. "Tell me someone can stop this," Richard said, his voice low and controlled. Nobody moved. Then a young cybersecurity analyst slowly looked up from his laptop. "There is one person who might understand what is happening." Richard turned. "Who?" The analyst hesitated. "Jordan Ellis." The room became silent. Richard's expression changed instantly. Not fear, not recognition, something closer to disbelief. "Jordan Ellis is gone," he said. "No," the analyst replied quietly. "Jordan Ellis was forgotten. 3 years earlier, Jordan Ellis had been the brightest young mind inside Whitmore Neural Systems. At only 22 years old, the black AI researcher from Atlanta, Georgia, had created the foundation for a revolutionary machine learning system called EtherMind. While other engineers focused on improving existing technology, Jordan imagined something different. He believed artificial intelligence could be designed to protect people, detect threats, and solve problems before they became disasters. His ideas came from years of studying, experimenting, and questioning everything around him. Jordan was not interested in fame, he was interested in impact. "Technology should make life safer," he once told Richard during a late-night meeting in the company's Austin Research Center. "If we build something powerful, we have a responsibility to use it correctly." Richard Whitmore had smiled at those words. He had praised Jordan's intelligence. He had called him the future of technology. But behind the expensive suits, private offices, and public speeches about innovation, Richard saw something else. He saw an opportunity. EtherMind became the centerpiece of Whitmore Neural Systems. Investors celebrated. Headlines called Richard a visionary. The world saw a billionaire genius building the future. Almost nobody knew the young engineer who created the foundation beneath it all. Jordan's name slowly disappeared from presentations. His research credits changed. His contributions became company-developed technology. When Jordan questioned what happened, Richard invited him into his office overlooking downtown Austin. The city lights reflected across the glass walls, but the room felt colder than the streets outside. "You know how business works, Jordan," Richard said. "Ideas become valuable when they are inside the right organization." Jordan looked at him carefully. "Are you saying my work belongs to you?" Richard leaned back. "I'm saying nobody believes a 22-year-old engineer over the founder of a billion-dollar company." Those words changed everything. Jordan tried to defend his research. He tried to show documents, development records, and years of work that proved the truth. But Richard had money, lawyers, and influence. The story was rewritten before Jordan could tell it. Within months, Jordan lost his position, his apartment, and the career he had spent his entire life building. The world that once called him a genius now called him a failure. But Jordan never stopped learning. He carried his knowledge with him even when he had nowhere to go. He spent nights in public libraries, reviewing code on an old laptop, and reminding himself that losing recognition did not mean losing his ability. 3 years later, standing outside the same company he helped create, Jordan saw the emergency alerts spreading across every news channel. Whitmore Neural Systems was falling apart. The company that had taken everything from him was facing the one problem nobody could solve. Jordan looked up at the towering glass building in downtown Austin. Rain moved across the streets, and the reflection of the company logo blurred in the water beneath his feet. He knew exactly what was happening inside those walls. He knew because he had built the system they were losing. Jordan closed his laptop and whispered, "I never wanted this to happen." Then he walked toward the entrance of the building that had once been his future. And this time, he was not returning for recognition. He was returning because thousands of innocent people depended on the truth. Jordan Ellis stopped just outside the entrance of Whitmore Neural Systems, his old workplace, and watched the automatic glass doors open and close as employees rushed through without noticing him. The building looked exactly the same as he remembered. The polished marble floors, the bright white lights, the giant screens displaying the company's latest achievements. But Jordan was different. 3 years ago, he had walked through those doors carrying a laptop full of ideas and a future he believed in. Now, he stood there with an old backpack, a worn jacket, and a lifetime of knowledge that nobody could see. A security guard near the entrance glanced at him and stepped forward. "Can I help you?" the man asked politely but cautiously. Jordan looked at the emergency alerts flashing on nearby screens. "I need to speak with Richard Whitmore." The guard looked surprised. "Do you have an appointment?" Jordan paused. "No, but I know what is happening to the system." The guard studied him for a moment. "Are you with the cybersecurity team?" Jordan shook his head. "I built part of the system." The words sounded impossible in that lobby. The guard gave a confused look, unsure whether Jordan was serious. "Sir, a lot of people are trying to get inside today." Jordan did not argue. He simply opened his old laptop and showed the security logs he had been tracking from outside. His fingers moved quickly across the keyboard. Lines of code appeared across the screen. The guard leaned closer. He did not understand everything he was seeing, but he understood one thing. Jordan knew exactly where the problem was. "Wait here," the guard said before walking toward the management office. Minutes later, the message reached the executive floor. The young man Richard Whitmore had erased from company history was standing in the lobby, claiming he could solve the crisis that had stopped the entire company. Richard refused to believe it at first. "Jordan Ellis?" he asked when the elevator doors opened. His voice carried disbelief. "After all this time, you come back here?" Jordan looked at the man who had once controlled every part of his life. The expensive suit, the confident posture, the same expression that once told him his voice did not matter. "Your system is failing because the security layer is fighting against the attack instead of adapting to it," Jordan said calmly. Richard narrowed his eyes. "And you expect me to believe that you figured this out from a laptop in the lobby?" "I did not figure it out today," Jordan replied. "I designed the architecture 3 years ago." The hallway became quiet. Several employees nearby stopped and listened. Richard lowered his voice. "You should leave." Jordan looked around the executive floor. He saw engineers who had once worked beside him, people who knew his ideas, people who now avoided his eyes. "If I leave, you lose more than a company," Jordan said. "Thousands of businesses depend on this technology." Richard stepped closer, but Jordan remained calm. "You still think this is about you and me?" Jordan continued. "It is not. This is about fixing a problem that affects people who had nothing to do with what happened between us." For a brief moment, Richard had no response, because that was the part he did not understand about Jordan. After everything that had happened, Jordan was still thinking about helping others. Years earlier, when Jordan was still working at Whitmore Neural Systems, he was known for staying late to help younger engineers understand difficult concepts. He never treated knowledge like something to protect. He treated it like something to share. One evening, an intern named Marcus Reed had asked him, "Why do you spend so much time teaching everyone? You could keep all these ideas for yourself." Jordan had smiled and answered, "A person does not become smaller by helping someone else grow." Those words stayed with Marcus. Now, 3 years later, Marcus was one of the senior engineers inside Whitmore Neural Systems. And when he saw Jordan standing in the hallway, he remembered the person who had helped him when nobody else noticed him. Marcus stepped forward. "Richard, he is telling the truth." The room turned. Richard looked at him. "You are questioning me?" Marcus took a breath. "I am saying we should listen to the person who understands this system better than anyone here." The billionaire CEO looked around the room. For the first time that day, his confidence began to weaken, because the person he had pushed away was no longer asking to be recognized. He was offering the only solution left. Jordan opened his laptop again and connected to the emergency network. The screens changed. The failed systems began showing patterns only he could read. Everyone watched silently as the person they had forgotten started working on the very technology they had taken from him. And deep inside the building that had once rejected him, the truth began finding its way back. The entire executive floor of Whitmore Neural Systems became silent as Jordan Ellis worked at the center of the room. The same people who once walked past him without a second glance were now watching every movement of his hand. The old laptop sitting in front of him looked out of place among the expensive equipment and advanced technology surrounding him, but the screen displayed something nobody else had been able to find. A pattern, a weakness, a way forward. Marcus Reed stood nearby, studying the information appearing across the monitor. "How did you see this so quickly?" he asked quietly. Jordan kept his eyes on the screen. "Because I know how the system thinks." Marcus looked at him carefully. "Because you built it." Jordan nodded. Because I built the foundation. The words carried a weight that everyone in the room understood. This was not just a technical problem. This was a reminder of everything that had been ignored. Richard Whitmore watched from behind the conference table, his arms crossed. He wanted to dismiss Jordan. He wanted to believe this was impossible. But every second that passed made that harder. What exactly are you saying? Richard asked. Jordan turned the laptop toward the executives. The system is not being defeated by a stronger attack. It is being confused by a hidden command sequence inside its own learning model. One of the senior engineers stepped closer. That cannot be possible. We reviewed the original architecture. Jordan looked at him. You reviewed the version after the changes. The engineer froze. Jordan continued calmly. The original framework had a different protection system. Someone modified the core structure after my departure. The room became uncomfortable. Nobody wanted to say what everyone was thinking. Jordan did not need to accuse anyone. The evidence was already pointing in a direction. Richard finally spoke. Be careful with your assumptions. Jordan looked at him. I am not making assumptions. I am showing data. 3 years earlier, Jordan had sat in the same building explaining those same concepts to a team of engineers. He remembered the excitement in the room when Ethermind first came alive. Back then, people asked questions because they wanted to understand. They did not question his value. They questioned the limits of what technology could achieve. But everything changed when the success became too valuable. The meetings became different. The conversations became shorter. His name became smaller. His contribution became invisible. Jordan remembered walking through the same hallway after discovering that his research records had been altered. He had expected someone to listen. Instead, he found doors closing. He found people who once praised his talent suddenly avoiding him. The hardest part was not losing his job. It was watching something he created continue without him while the world believed someone else deserved the credit. Back in the present, Jordan focused on the screen. He was not there to reopen old wounds. He was there because people depended on the technology. I can stabilize the system, Jordan said, but I need full access to the original development environment. Richard immediately responded. Absolutely not. Marcus looked at him. Richard, if he is right, we do not have another option. Richard turned toward the engineers. You are all willing to trust him after everything? Jordan quietly closed his laptop for a moment. You are not trusting me because of who I am. You are trusting the results. That sentence stayed in the room because it was the truth nobody could ignore. Jordan did not ask for sympathy. He did not ask for an apology. He only asked for the opportunity to fix what was broken. After several tense moments, Richard finally walked toward the security terminal. His expression remained firm, but something behind his eyes had changed. Give him temporary access, he ordered. The engineers immediately began connecting Jordan to the system. Screens across the room changed from warning messages to streams of information. Jordan moved carefully, analyzing every layer. Then he stopped. His expression changed slightly. Marcus noticed. What is it? Jordan looked at the data in silence. This was not just a technical failure. The room waited. Jordan slowly turned toward the executives. Someone changed the system intentionally. Nobody spoke. The expensive conference room, filled with powerful people, suddenly felt much smaller. Richard stared at Jordan. Are you certain? Jordan looked back at the code that carried pieces of his own work. I know my own creation. Outside the building, the rain continued falling over downtown Austin. Inside, a forgotten engineer had just uncovered a truth that could change everything. Jordan Ellis stared at the lines of code spreading across the screen, and for the first time since he entered Whitmore Neural Systems, the room felt completely still. The engineers who had been searching for answers all day were no longer looking at the system. They were looking at him. Someone changed the architecture after I left, Jordan repeated calmly. They did not just update the system, they altered the way it makes decisions. Richard Whitmore remained standing at the end of the conference table, watching every reaction around him. He had built his entire reputation on control. Every decision inside the company passed through his approval. Every major announcement carried his name. But now, the one person who could explain the failure was the person he had removed from the story. Can you prove it? Richard asked. Jordan looked at the data again. Yes, but it will take time. A senior engineer named Daniel Brooks stepped forward. He had worked at Whitmore Neural Systems for 8 years and had always believed the company's success came from teamwork. How much time? Daniel asked. Jordan checked the system status. If the current pattern continues, the damage will spread across every connected platform. Richard immediately interrupted. How long? Jordan looked directly at him. 4 hours. The room reacted quietly. 4 hours. That was all they had before the company's most valuable technology became unreliable. Jordan began working through the original framework. Every line of code told a story. Every decision inside the system reflected the way he had designed it. He remembered the nights in the research lab in Atlanta when he had built the first version on a small computer in his apartment. He remembered the excitement of discovering that artificial intelligence could do more than process information. It could recognize problems before they happened. It could protect people. That was always his goal. Not money, not attention, purpose. But when the technology became valuable, people saw something different. Richard saw a product. Investors saw a business opportunity. The world saw a billion-dollar company. Almost nobody saw the young black engineer who had created the foundation. There is something else, Jordan said suddenly. Marcus Reed looked up from his workstation. What did you find? Jordan zoomed into a section of the system. A hidden access pathway. Daniel walked closer. That should not exist. Jordan nodded. It was not part of my original design. The room grew quiet again. Richard stepped forward. Are you suggesting someone inside the company did this? Jordan did not answer immediately. He looked at the screens around him. I am saying the system was changed by someone who understood the original structure. The billionaire CEO looked uncomfortable. Be careful, Jordan. Jordan closed the file and turned toward him. I am being careful. That is why I am looking at evidence instead of making accusations. Those words carried through the room. Richard had expected anger. He had expected revenge. He had expected Jordan to walk back into the company carrying years of frustration. Instead, Jordan stood there with the same calm focus he had always shown. That was what made Richard uncomfortable. Jordan was not trying to destroy him. He was trying to solve a problem. Marcus watched quietly, remembering the person Jordan had been before everything changed. He remembered being a new employee who struggled to understand complex systems. He remembered Jordan staying after work to explain concepts that others ignored. You know, Marcus said softly, he helped half this team become better engineers. Richard glanced at him. That is irrelevant. Marcus shook his head. No, it is not. It explains why he built something people trusted. Jordan continued analyzing the system. Then he found another piece of information. A series of modifications made shortly after his departure. The timing was too specific. The changes happened only weeks after his research access was removed. I need the original company records, Jordan said. Richard hesitated. Why? Jordan answered without looking away from the screen. Because whoever changed this system left a trail. For the first time, Richard had no immediate response. The company he built was now depending on the person he had pushed away. The same person he believed could be replaced. The same person whose name had disappeared from every presentation. Jordan entered the final command. The screens changed again. A new file appeared. Marcus leaned closer. What is that? Jordan looked at the information appearing in front of him. His expression remained calm, but everyone could feel the importance of what they were seeing. This is the original development record. The room held its breath. Because inside that file was not only the answer to the system failure, it was the proof of who truly created the technology that made Whitmore Neural Systems famous. The original development record appeared on the screen like a forgotten piece of history waiting to be discovered. Jordan Ellis stared at the file name for several seconds. He knew what it represented. Not just a collection of documents. Not just lines of research. It was the proof that his work existed before the world ever heard Richard Whitmore's name attached to it. Open it, Marcus Reed said quietly. Jordan hesitated for a moment before pressing the key. The folder expanded across the screen. Inside were years of research notes, development logs, and archived versions of Ethermind. Every major breakthrough carried the same name, Jordan Ellis. The room became silent as the employees watched the evidence appear in front of them. Daniel Brooks adjusted his glasses and looked through the records carefully. These timestamps go back before the company announcement, he said. Months before. Nobody responded. They did not need to. The information was clear. Jordan's work had been the foundation from the beginning. Richard Whitmore stood at the edge of the conference room, watching the story he had carefully built begin to change. Those files are incomplete, Richard said. His voice remained calm, but the confidence behind it was weaker than before. Jordan looked at him. Then help us complete the picture. Richard frowned. What does that mean? Jordan turned the laptop slightly. It means we compare the original records with the current system. We find out exactly what changed and when. That was the difference between Jordan and everyone expected him to be. He was not searching for revenge, he was searching for answers. 3 years earlier, when his name disappeared from the project, Jordan could have spent every day trying to prove people wrong. He could have allowed anger to become the center of his life. But instead, he kept learning, he kept improving, he kept building. Because deep inside, he knew something important. A person could lose a position. A person could lose recognition. But knowledge was not something another person could take away. Marcus watched Jordan work and remembered the day they first met. Marcus had been a young intern walking through the Atlanta Research Division, overwhelmed by the complexity of the technology around him. Many senior engineers were too busy to answer his questions. Jordan was different. He stayed after hours and explained difficult concepts until Marcus understood. "Why are you helping me?" Marcus had asked. Jordan smiled. "Because someone helped me once. That is how progress continues." Now, Marcus looked around the conference room filled with executives who had ignored Jordan's contribution. "Everyone here should know something," Marcus said. The reason this company succeeded was because Jordan believed technology should help people, not just increase profits. Richard looked away. The statement bothered him because it challenged the image he had created for years. Richard had always believed success came from ownership, from control, from being the person whose name appeared at the top. But Jordan represented something different. He represented the person behind the achievement, the person whose work existed even when nobody applauded. Suddenly, another warning appeared on the screen. The room shifted back to the crisis. The system failure was continuing. Jordan immediately returned his attention to the problem. "The original records explain the changes, but they do not stop the current issue," he said. "I need access to the deepest system layer." Richard looked uncertain. "That level of access is restricted." Jordan nodded. "I know. I designed those restrictions." Daniel looked between them. "Richard, if we do not give him access, we are guessing." The billionaire remained quiet. For years, people had followed his decisions without question, but now the person he had pushed away was the only one giving them direction. Finally, Richard walked toward the security terminal. "Grant him access." The words sounded simple, but everyone understood what they meant. For the first time, Richard Whitmore was forced to trust Jordan Ellis. The system opened. New information appeared. Jordan moved through the architecture he once created, searching for the source of the failure. Then he stopped. His eyes focused on one specific section of code. Marcus noticed immediately. "What is it?" Jordan took a slow breath. This was not an accident. The room became quiet again. Jordan continued. "Someone did not just change my work. Someone changed it to create a weakness." The truth settled over the room. The failure was not random. The collapse was connected to a decision made long ago. Richard looked at the screen, then at Jordan. "Can you identify who did this?" Jordan looked back at the evidence. Yes. Outside the windows, the lights of Austin reflected against the glass towers. Inside, the company that had erased Jordan's name was finally forced to face the person behind its greatest achievement. And now, the truth was only beginning to unfold. Jordan Ellis kept his eyes fixed on the screen, where the hidden pathway inside Ethermind continued revealing information that had remained buried for years. The room around him felt different now. It was no longer a place where decisions were made by the people with the biggest titles or the most expensive suits. It was a place where the truth was slowly becoming impossible to ignore. "I found the origin point," Jordan said quietly. Marcus Reed moved closer. "Where does it lead?" Jordan traced the sequence of changes through the system. "A private development branch created after I left the company." Daniel Brooks looked confused. "A private branch? That means someone copied the original architecture and continued working on it separately." Jordan nodded. "Exactly." Richard Whitmore watched the screen carefully. His expression remained controlled, but the silence around him revealed the pressure building inside the room. "Can you identify the person responsible?" Richard asked. Jordan looked through the records. "Not yet, but I can show when the changes started." He clicked on the timeline. A date appeared. The room became quiet. It was the same period when Jordan's access had been removed, and his research credits had disappeared from company records. Nobody spoke for several seconds. The connection was clear. Jordan remembered that time vividly. He remembered leaving the company building for the final time, carrying a small box with personal items while employees walked past him. He remembered the feeling of seeing years of work continue without his name attached to it. But more than anything, He remembered the promise he made to himself. He would not allow someone else's actions to decide who he became. Back in the present, Jordan continued working. The system is still unstable, he said. Finding the source is only the first step. Richard looked at him. What do you need? It was a simple question, but everyone in the room noticed something unusual. For the first time, Richard Whitmore was asking Jordan Ellis for guidance. Jordan answered immediately. I need the original server records, every internal communication connected to the development changes, and full access to the company archives. Daniel nodded. That will take hours to organize. Jordan shook his head. Then start now. The confidence in his voice surprised everyone. Not arrogance, not anger, just certainty. Marcus watched him and understood something important. Jordan had changed. 3 years ago, he had been a brilliant young engineer who wanted recognition for his work. Now he was someone who had lost recognition and discovered something stronger, purpose. As the team gathered the information, Jordan stepped away from the conference table for a moment. Through the large windows, he looked down at downtown Austin. The city lights reflected across the glass, creating thousands of small points of light. He remembered walking these streets when he had nowhere to sleep and wondering if anyone would ever believe him again. There were moments when he questioned whether fighting for the truth was worth it, moments when the easier choice would have been to walk away. But then he remembered why he created Ethermind in the first place. Technology was never supposed to belong only to the powerful. It was supposed to serve people. Marcus approached quietly. You know, most people would have left this place forever. Jordan looked back at him. Maybe. Marcus smiled slightly. Then why come back? Jordan looked at the screens showing the failing system. Because the people affected by this did nothing wrong. That answer stayed with Marcus. It was the same reason Jordan had always been different. He never measured success by what he could take. He measured it by what he could give. Suddenly, Daniel called from across the room. Jordan, we found something. Everyone turned. Daniel opened a new file containing internal development records. There is a second version of Ethermind. Jordan walked back to the table. The information appeared on the screen. The file showed a modified system built from his original work. But there was something else. Hidden deep inside the records was a message attached to the development history. Jordan read it carefully. His expression changed slightly. What does it say? Marcus asked. Jordan looked at the screen. It says the original creator was removed from the project. The room fell silent. Those words were not just a technical note. They were a reminder that someone had intentionally erased him. Richard stepped closer, reading the message himself. For the first time, he saw the story from a different perspective. Not as a business decision, not as a corporate strategy, but as a person's life being rewritten by someone with more power. Jordan closed the file and returned his attention to the system. We still need to fix the problem. Richard looked at him. After everything you discovered, you still want to save this company? Jordan met his eyes. I want to stop people from losing access to something they depend on. The answer left the room silent, because Jordan was proving something nobody expected. The person who had every reason to walk away was the one person willing to stay, and as the night continued over Austin, the truth moved closer to the surface, waiting for the moment when everyone would finally see what had been hidden. The room remained silent after Jordan Ellis revealed the hidden message inside the development records. Nobody moved for several seconds. The words on the screen were simple, but they carried the weight of 3 years of unanswered questions. The original creator was removed from the project. Daniel Brooks slowly looked away from the monitor. That was written into the system history? He asked. Jordan nodded. Someone wanted a record to disappear. Richard Whitmore stood behind the table, watching the evidence unfold. For years, he had been surrounded by people who agreed with him, people who accepted his version of events because his name was attached to the company. But now, inside the same building where he had built his reputation, the truth was coming from the one person he had chosen to ignore. We can discuss this later, Richard said. Right now we need to stabilize the system. Jordan looked at the failing network displays. He agreed. The crisis still affected thousands of users, and he refused to let personal history become more important than the people depending on the technology. I need 30 minutes with the core system, Jordan said. Daniel looked surprised. 30 minutes? Jordan nodded. The problem is not the amount of damage. The problem is that the system is searching for the wrong solution. The engineers gathered around him as he began adjusting the framework. His approach was different from everyone else's. While others looked for ways to block the problem, Jordan looked for the reason the system reacted incorrectly. He understood the architecture because he had designed the foundation. Every decision inside Aethermind had started as an idea in his mind. Every protection layer had been created with a purpose. As the minutes passed, the warning messages began changing. One by one, the red alerts disappeared from the screens. The room watched in disbelief. "The system is responding," Daniel said quietly. Marcus smiled. "Because it recognizes the original structure." Jordan did not celebrate. He continued working. He knew the technical problem was only one part of the story. The deeper question remained unanswered. Who changed the system, and why? After stabilizing the network, Jordan opened the archived records again. This time, he searched deeper. Hidden beneath layers of company files was a sequence of internal approvals, documents that showed decisions made during the period when his name disappeared. Marcus leaned closer. "Jordan, look at this." A series of executive approvals appeared on the screen. The final authorization came from a department controlled by Richard Whitmore's closest leadership team. Richard saw the information and became quiet. Jordan did not look at him with anger. He simply said, "The records explain what happened." Richard looked at the screen. "You think I knew?" Jordan paused. The room waited for his answer. "I think you knew enough to ask questions." The sentence was calm, but it carried more weight than an accusation. Because Jordan was not only talking about technology, he was talking about choices, about moments when someone could have stopped and looked closer. Richard lowered his eyes. For the first time, the billionaire CEO seemed less like a powerful executive and more like a person facing the consequences of ignoring the truth. Daniel reviewed the records carefully. "There is still one missing piece," he said. Jordan looked at him. "What piece?" Daniel pointed to the screen. "The person who created the private development branch." Jordan studied the information. Then he noticed a name connected to the earliest modifications. A senior executive named Victor Hale. Victor had been responsible for product expansion during the years when Aethermind became the company's biggest success. Richard recognized the name immediately. "Victor was one of my most trusted executives." Marcus looked confused. "Was?" Richard did not answer, because he already knew something was wrong. Victor had resigned 6 months earlier after claiming he wanted to pursue other opportunities. But now the records showed something different. He had been working on a separate version of Aethermind without approval. Jordan looked at Richard. "Your company did not just lose control of the system." Richard remained silent. Jordan continued. "Someone inside the company tried to control something they did not fully understand." The truth was becoming clearer. The failure was not caused by an outside threat. It was caused by someone changing a creation they did not build. Outside the Whitmore headquarters, cameras captured the lights still burning on the executive floor long after midnight. News reporters waited outside, wondering if the technology empire was about to collapse. But inside the building, something else was happening. A man who had been erased was restoring the very system that had changed the world. And a man who believed power could control every story was beginning to realize one thing. The truth had been waiting quietly all along. It just needed someone brave enough to uncover it. The name on the screen changed everything. Victor Hale. For years, he had been one of the most trusted executives at Whitmore Neural Systems. He stood beside Richard Whitmore during major announcements, appeared in company presentations, and was known as one of the minds behind the company's rapid growth. But now, the records showed a different story. Victor had created a private development branch using the foundation of Aethermind without proper authorization. The room remained quiet as everyone processed the information. "Victor built a separate version?" Marcus Reed asked. Jordan Ellis nodded slowly. "Yes, and he modified parts of the system he did not fully understand." Richard looked at the screen, his expression unreadable. "Victor was responsible for expansion. He handled major projects." Jordan looked at him. That does not mean he understood the original design. The sentence was simple, but it carried a deeper meaning. Technology could be copied. Code could be changed, but understanding the purpose behind something was different. Jordan continued reviewing the records. He found messages showing Victor wanted to accelerate the company's growth by removing what he considered unnecessary limitations. Those limitations were the safety systems Jordan had designed. The very protections created to prevent problems had been weakened in the pursuit of faster results. Daniel Brooks shook his head. "He removed the safeguards because they slowed development." Jordan replied quietly, "The safeguards were there because responsibility matters." Those words stayed with everyone, because that was the difference between Jordan and the people who had taken his work. They saw technology as something to control. Jordan saw it as something to protect. Richard walked toward the window overlooking Austin. The city below continued moving, unaware of what was happening inside the company that powered so many businesses. For the first time in years, he was forced to look beyond the image of success he had created. He thought about the day Jordan left. He remembered the conversation. He remembered the confidence he had when he believed the company could continue without one young engineer. He remembered saying, "Nobody believes a 22-year-old engineer over $1 billion company." Now those words felt different. They no longer sounded powerful. They sounded like a mistake. "What happens if we release this information?" Richard asked. Jordan continued typing. "The truth becomes public." Richard looked at him. "And what happens to the company?" Jordan paused. "That depends on whether the company chooses honesty or protection." Nobody expected that answer. Jordan had every reason to expose everything immediately. He had every reason to make Richard feel the same helplessness he once felt, but he did not. He was still focused on solving the problem first. Marcus noticed. "You know, you could have walked away and watched this happen." Jordan looked at the system status. "Yes. So why did you not?" Marcus asked. Jordan answered without hesitation. "Because people are not the same as the mistakes made by the people in charge." The room became quiet. It was the kind of silence that made everyone think. Jordan was not protecting Richard. He was protecting innocent people who depended on the technology. That was something power could not understand. A person could be hurt and still choose compassion. A person could be treated unfairly and still choose to do what was right. As the engineers continued repairing the remaining issues, new information arrived. The company's legal department had reviewed the records and confirmed the evidence was authentic. The development history, the approval records, and the archived files all supported Jordan's claim. The truth was no longer hidden inside a computer system. It was now impossible to ignore. Richard returned to the conference table. For a moment, he looked at Jordan differently, not as a former employee, not as a problem from the past, but as the person who had saved the company from a disaster he did not create. "Jordan," Richard said quietly. Jordan looked up. "I need to ask you something." The entire room became still. Richard took a breath. "Why are you helping me?" Jordan looked at him for a moment. The answer came calmly. "Because someone has to do what is right, even when it is not easy." Richard lowered his eyes. It was not the answer he expected. He expected anger. He expected demands. He expected Jordan to use this moment to take everything back. Instead, Jordan asked for nothing. And that was when Richard finally understood the person he had underestimated. The most powerful thing about Jordan Ellis was never the technology he created. It was the character he kept when everything else was taken away. The first light of morning reached downtown Austin, Texas, painting the glass walls of Whitmore Neural Systems with a soft golden glow. After a night that changed everything, the company was no longer the same. The system had been stabilized. The hidden records had been discovered. And the truth that had been buried for years was finally visible. Jordan Ellis sat quietly in the same conference room where he had once been told that his voice did not matter. But this time, he was not standing there as a forgotten employee. He was sitting there as the person who had saved the technology that powered the entire company. Around him, engineers reviewed the repaired system. The warning messages were gone. The network was stable. Thousands of users who depended on Ethermind could continue their work without disruption. Marcus Reed looked at Jordan and smiled. "You realize everyone in this building knows what happened now, right?" Jordan looked toward the windows. "Knowing the truth is only the beginning." Marcus nodded. He understood what Jordan meant. A company could repair a system in a few hours, but repairing trust required something more. Across the room, Richard Whitmore stood alone, looking at the reports from the legal team. The evidence was clear. Victor Hale had manipulated the development process, removed important safety features, and created a version of Ethermind that prioritized speed over responsibility. But Richard also had to face another truth. He had allowed the environment where it happened. He had believed success was only about growth, numbers, and recognition. He had ignored the people who helped create that success. Later that morning, Richard asked Jordan to meet him privately. They sat in a smaller office overlooking the city. The same type of office where Richard had once told Jordan that nobody would believe him. But this time, the atmosphere was different. "I have spent years building this company," Richard said quietly. "I thought protecting it meant protecting my reputation." Jordan listened without interrupting. Richard looked down at the documents on the table. "I was wrong." The words were difficult for him to say. A person like Richard Whitmore was used to giving answers, not admitting mistakes. What happened to you should never have happened, Richard continued. Your work should have been recognized. Your name should have been there from the beginning. Jordan remained silent for a moment. Then he said, the hardest part was not losing the job. Richard looked at him. What was it? Jordan answered, it was watching people believe a story that was not true. The room became quiet. Outside, the city continued moving. Cars passed through the streets. People walked between buildings. Life continued, even while two people from completely different worlds finally faced the same reality. Richard asked, what do you want now? Jordan looked surprised by the question. He had expected an apology, but not an offer. I want the people who create things to be valued, Jordan said. Not because of their title, not because of their background, because their work matters. Richard nodded slowly. A few days later, Whitmore Neural Systems announced major changes. The company publicly recognized Jordan Ellis as the original creator of the EtherMind Foundation. The announcement spread quickly through the technology community. Universities invited Jordan to speak. Young engineers shared his story. But Jordan did not focus on the attention. He focused on the message. At Georgia Institute of Technology in Atlanta, where he had once studied, Jordan stood in front of a group of students. Many of them were young people searching for their place in the world. One student asked him, how did you keep going when everyone ignored you? Jordan thought carefully before answering. Because my value was never created by someone else's opinion. The room became silent. Those words stayed with everyone who heard them. Months later, Jordan returned to Austin. He walked past the same building where he had once stood outside with uncertainty. The glass doors opened automatically. Employees recognized him now. They greeted him with respect. But Jordan did not stop to enjoy the attention. He simply walked forward, carrying the same quiet confidence he always had. Because the person who entered that building years ago and the person who left it were never truly different. The world had changed its view of him, but Jordan had never forgotten who he was. And as the sunlight reflected across the streets of Austin, one truth remained clear. Power can hide a name for a while. Money can influence a story. But integrity has a way of returning to the light.